I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. That's the thought that kept looping in my head the morning I found her umbrella lying on the back seat of my car, still damp at the edges. She'd forgotten it after I dropped her home the night before. I almost texted her right away, but the message sat half-typed for 10 minutes before I deleted it. It felt unnecessary, or maybe too intentional. I wasn't planning to see her again so soon. That's the thing with Mrs. Safia, my mother's friend, the one who has known me since I was 11. She appears in these small, ordinary ways that somehow manage to shift the air around me. That afternoon, I ended up at the old neighborhood bookstore. It's where I go when I don't want to be anywhere else. The aisles are always too narrow and the lights always slightly dimmer than they should be, but I like the quiet. I like pretending I'm looking for something specific when really I'm just waiting for my thoughts to settle. I was flipping through a used copy of a travel book when I heard her voice before I saw her. "You're still drawn to the same section." I froze for half a second. She had that effect. Her presence arrived softly, but landed with weight. When I turned, she was standing a few steps behind me, hair slightly undone from the wind, her scarf slipping off one shoulder like she hadn't bothered to fix it. "Oh, hey," I said a beat too late. She smiled, the small kind, the knowing kind. "You always find a reason to come here." My stomach tightened. She said it like it meant something. Not suspicious, just amused. Like the quiet," I answered, closing the book even though I wasn't done. My fingers kept tapping the cover, a nervous habit I thought I'd grown out of. "You've always liked quiet places," she said, brushing a thumb over the spine of a novel she wasn't actually reading. "Even as a kid, you'd stand behind your mother during tea like you were observing the room." I didn't expect her to remember that. I didn't expect her to remember me like that. She moved closer to scan the shelf beside me, and for a moment her shoulder hovered an inch from mine. I flicked my eyes toward her hands. She had this way of touching books lightly, like they might bruise. I didn't realize I was staring until she glanced at me. Not a question, just a soft acknowledgement. "So," she said, clearing her throat gently, "did you find what you were looking for?" I shook my head, still figuring that out. She let out a quiet laugh. "That makes two of us." Something in her tone felt heavier than the words. Or maybe I was imagining it. I'd been doing that a lot lately, reading too deeply into pauses, wondering if her smiles lingered a second longer than they should. She reached out to adjust the scarf finally, and I swear I could smell the faint citrus of her perfume. Familiar, in an uncomfortable way. "Oh," I said suddenly, remembering. "Your umbrella. You left it in my car." Her eyes widened slightly. "Did I? I didn't even realize." "Yeah, it's still there. I can drop it off later." Her lips pressed together, almost thoughtfully. "You don't have to go out of your way." "It's not out of the way," I said too quickly. She noticed. I felt she noticed. She looked at me for a moment too long, like she was deciding something. But then she only nodded and turned back to the shelves. I folded the corner of the book I was holding even though it wasn't mine. My thumb kept tracing the crease. We walked out together. Not planned. We just ended up at the register at the same time. Outside, the sky was shifting into the kind of pale blue that makes everything else look colder. "Well," she said, pulling her scarf tighter, "text me when you're around." "For the umbrella." "Yeah," I replied, adjusting my sleeve for no reason. "I will." She took a few steps, paused, turned back. "Don't forget," she said softly. The way she said it felt like it wasn't about the umbrella at all. I watched her walk away, and only when she disappeared around the corner did my phone buzz in my pocket. One new message. From her. "If you're free tonight, come by." I just stood there, staring at the screen, heart doing that slow, unsure beat that feels almost like a question. And I didn't move. Not yet. Not until I figured out why that invitation felt heavier than it should. The door clicked softly behind me, and I followed her inside, careful not to let the umbrella drip too far across her polished floor. She shrugged it off, and I set it by the entryway, glancing around at the small apartment. Books stacked in uneven towers, teacups drying in the sink, a half-finished knitting project she'd abandoned on the couch. "Sit," she said, motioning to a chair opposite her. She was already settling with a mug of steaming green tea. I hesitated, then took the seat, hands fidgeting with the edge of the cushion. The silence stretched. Not awkward. Exactly. More like waiting for permission to exist. I noticed her glance flick toward my fingers, then back to the window where the light was fading into gold. "You know," she said finally, her voice low, "I used to come here sometimes, after work. Just sit, watch the street, drink tea alone." She lifted her cup slightly, a private gesture that made it look heavier than it should. I nodded. "I get that." I wanted to say more, but my words always came out too fast or not at all. Instead, I traced the rim of my own mug. She smiled faintly, like she remembered a detail she wasn't sure she wanted to share. "It's quiet here. Not exactly lonely, not exactly company." Her honesty landed in the space between us. I wanted to respond, to tell her how I spent evenings scrolling my phone, half writing texts I'd never send, watching the ceiling fan move in circles, pretending it wasn't because I was waiting for something I didn't have a name for. But I just nodded again. "You've changed," she said softly, almost to herself. "You used to, well, you used to be more loud, less careful." I smiled, half embarrassed. "I guess growing up does that." She laughed quietly, not a full laugh, just enough to make her eyes crinkle. And I realized I could imagine her laughter echoing in other rooms, at other times, as if I'd been listening my whole life. We sat in silence after that. She stirred her tea, and I noticed the subtle motion of her wrist, the way her scarf kept slipping, the little sighs she made when her thoughts wandered. I tried to imagine what it would feel like to reach across the table and hold her hand, just to see if the weight of it matched the thoughts I'd been carrying all afternoon. I pushed it away. Forbidden. Dangerous. Too many lines we weren't supposed to cross. Still, when she leaned slightly forward to reach for the teapot to pour me more, our hands brushed. Just a fingertip, nothing intentional, nothing confessed. But it was enough. Enough to make me notice the warmth of her skin, the faint scent of citrus lingering as though it had always been part of the room. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For noticing," I murmured, even though I wasn't sure if that was true. She didn't answer, only gave a small smile and tilted her head. Her gaze lingered just a second too long, the kind that doesn't just see you. It measures, weighs, recognizes. And when I left, the gesture that stayed with me wasn't a word. It was the brief touch of her fingers against mine, a casual brush that felt deliberate enough to make me wonder if someone, at least for a second, had finally noticed me. I walked back to my car, carrying tea warmth in my chest and a quiet, impossible thought. Maybe some connections are made not by what is said, but by what isn't. Reflective pivot line at the end. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I hadn't meant to go back the next evening, but the tea had stayed warm in my thoughts all day, the faint scent of citrus following me through errands and scrolling through my phone. By the time I reached her door, my hand hesitated over the bell. I wasn't sure if I wanted her to answer or not. She opened it almost immediately, like she'd been expecting me, and smiled that quiet, knowing smile again. I stepped inside, aware of the faint hum of her fridge, the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. Something ordinary, but somehow sharper than usual. "You came back," she said, tilting her head. Not accusing, not pleased, just observing. I thought I'd, maybe help with dinner, I muttered. Even as I said it, I realized how absurd it sounded. She leaned against the counter, stirring something in a small pan, and I stood a step too close, conscious of her scent, her scarf slipping again. My fingers itched to touch the edge of her sleeve, to see if the warmth lingered. I didn't. We worked in silence for a while. I chopped vegetables while she moved around the kitchen with quiet efficiency. Every so often, our elbows brushed. Every time, a small jolt of awareness. And then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, muttered something about her mother, and left the room. Alone, I leaned against the counter, pretending to arrange utensils while my chest tightened. When she returned, she brought a small plate of something sweet and set it in front of me. "Here, taste." I reached for it, and our hands touched again. This time longer, hesitant, and I felt the quiet weight of it, like an unspoken question suspended in the air. My mind raced. imagining what it would be like if I didn't pull back, if I leaned in a little closer, if... A knock at the door startled both of us. I jumped slightly, and she went to answer it. Her friend, a neighbor stopping by for something trivial, leaned in to say hello, and the spell broke. Conversation started, polite and loud enough to fill the kitchen, and I suddenly felt the distance between us, the thing I'd been trying to ignore. We weren't supposed to be here, not like this. By the time they left, the evening had shifted. The air was warmer somehow, but heavier. I washed a plate, and she watched me, her gaze quiet but intense. Every movement felt amplified. The way her fingers tapped the edge of the counter, the small dip of her shoulder, the way she didn't quite turn away. Should probably go, I said, voice trailing. She moved toward me, and for a moment, the kitchen shrank around us. She leaned down slightly, as if to check the edge of my sleeve, and our eyes locked. My pulse thudded, and I could feel the tiny tremor in my hands. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice stuck. She tilted her head closer, lips almost brushing my cheek, and I froze. A near kiss, a half-confession, everything caught in the quiet between us. Then she stepped back. A small smile, apologetic, unreadable. "Tomorrow," she said softly. I left with my heart thudding, the hallway quiet except for the echo of the kitchen behind me. The air outside was cooler than the warmth we'd left behind, and I walked slower than I should have, replaying the brush of our hands, the tilt of her head, the weight of almost. And that was enough to keep me thinking about her all night. The rain started soft, almost polite, as I followed her down the narrow sidewalk. She held the umbrella low, letting the drizzle hit the edges of her hair, while I kept my hands stuffed in my pockets, unsure if I should say something, anything, or just let the rhythm of our steps do it for me. "I saw him today," she said suddenly, not looking at me. Her voice was low, almost careful. "Oh," I said, and kept my eyes on the wet pavement. "My neighbor, he stopped by while we were talking. He's always around, you know, chatting, asking questions." I didn't. She paused, swallowed something, and the silence that followed was heavier than the rain. I felt it instantly. A flare of jealousy I hadn't expected, a sharp edge I couldn't soften with a joke or a thought. My throat tightened. "You don't have to tell me," I murmured, my voice trailing off before it could carry more than that. She glanced at me, briefly, the umbrella tilting as if caught in the wind. "No, maybe I should. You deserve to know." Her words broke off mid-sentence, and she shook her head as if to clear it. We walked on, slower now, letting the small puddles ripple beneath our feet. I noticed the way her fingers gripped the umbrella handle, the faint tremor in her hand. The kind of tremor that doesn't come from cold, but from something quieter, closer, inside. "I shouldn't," she said finally. "I shouldn't let myself." Her words ended in a sigh, barely audible over the soft drum of rain. I stopped for a moment, and she did too. Our shoulders brushed, just a little, and I felt a pulse of something I could barely name. Guilt, desire, fear, all tangled, all wrong, and yet, "I don't know why I'm here," I said, too honest, too loud in my own head. "Why I keep coming back. I know it's wrong. I know." I trailed off, embarrassed, unable to finish. Her eyes softened, and she looked down at the street, letting the umbrella dip a little, exposing her hair to the rain. "It's not about right or wrong," she said, voice trembling slightly. "It's about..." She stopped. Pause. Breathing. Then, I can't not notice you." Something inside me thudded so loudly I was sure she could hear it. I wanted to speak, to reach, to bridge the space that suddenly felt too wide, too small, all at once. But I didn't. We moved again, side by side, closer now, but not close enough. The rain glossed the streetlights, shimmering reflections beneath our feet, and the world shrank to just us and the sound of water hitting the pavement. "I shouldn't feel this," she whispered. Then, pause. A glance at me that lasted longer than it should have. I wanted to tell her everything, to confess every thought I'd swallowed, every near touch, every sleepless evening replaying her smile. But the words caught somewhere between my heart and my mouth. Instead, I swallowed hard, fingers tightening in my coat pockets, and asked the question I couldn't say out loud. "What are we doing?" The rain fell around us, polite, patient. She didn't answer. And in that pause, just a few seconds, everything felt like it could change. Or break. The next few days, the apartment felt emptier than it should have. I stopped by at the usual times, carrying tea, fumbling with my umbrella, rehearsing what I might say. Only she wasn't there. Or if she was, she didn't answer the door. I left notes slipped under the door. Just tea. Just a hello. Nothing. Each time, the quiet of the hallway seemed to stretch longer, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I caught glimpses of her from the window across the street once, moving through the apartment, scarf in place, phone in hand, but she never waved, never looked up. I wanted to think it was deliberate, that she was busy, distracted. But the ache in my chest whispered otherwise. It wasn't just absence. When she did finally answer, her eyes held something I hadn't seen before. Caution, maybe even fear. She smiled faintly, said nothing about the last evening, and I felt the ground shift under me. The familiarity fractured. Later, I learned why. Not in words from her. She never mentioned it, but through a conversation overheard at her favorite bakery. She had a son, 20-something, visiting intermittently, someone she'd never mentioned. A small, ordinary detail that suddenly weighed impossibly between us. I walked home slowly, replaying every brush of our hands, every hesitant glance, wondering if I had misread the entire world. Was she just kind? Was I just hoping too much? Even when she texted me, it was clipped, ordinary, busy, later, and later never came. I stared at the phone, thumbs hovering over the keyboard. Messages I would never send accumulated. I miss you. Are you okay? I shouldn't be thinking this. None of them went through. At night, I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan move in circles, imagining her leaning against the counter, the faint tremor in her hands. I imagined her reaching out, stopping just short, the soft smile that had haunted my afternoons. And then, the reality. An empty chair, a closed door, no explanation. My routine began to fold in on itself. Coffee tasted bitter. Books unread. Streets walked alone. Each step felt hollow, like I was walking through a story that had paused mid-sentence, waiting for someone else to decide if it should continue. I thought about calling, about knocking, about showing up with tea or excuses. But the hesitation grew heavier with every hour. What if I ruined what little remained of the fragile connection we'd built? I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel heartbreak, exactly. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. Every memory, every near touch, every soft glance sat suspended, waiting, hovering, undefined. I left my shoes by the door that evening, a small gesture of readiness, as if she might appear and fill the apartment with presence again. And then I sat in silence, phone in hand, hovering over a message I couldn't bring myself to send. I'm here. When you're ready. I didn't press send. The chair across from me remained empty. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and tea. She was perched on a stool by the counter, hands wrapped around a mug, and I stood near the sink, pretending to wash a cup, but mostly staring at the small pool of water in the basin. Tea, she offered, voice careful. Not warm, not distant, somewhere in between. I nodded, took the mug she handed me. My fingers brushed hers. Just a flicker. Enough. We sat at the small table, close but not too close, letting the quiet fill the space. The clock ticked steadily. Outside, the city murmured past the window. I wanted to speak. I wanted to pour out everything. The near touch in the rain, the nights of waiting, the ache in my chest every time she stepped away. But words felt dangerous. Too heavy. I started with something smaller, safer. I didn't understand. About the days you weren't answering. I stopped, swallowed. Her eyes didn't leave me, but she didn't push either. She stirred her tea slowly. I needed to see where I stood. With everything. And I wasn't sure what that was. Pause. A sip. Her gaze fell to the table, then back to me. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I nodded. Relief tangled with guilt. I wasn't angry. Just lost. Another pause. Neither of us knew what else to say. I traced a ring on the edge of my mug. She adjusted her scarf. Our movements were uncoordinated but intimate, like small planets orbiting the same quiet gravity. "I've been thinking about you," she said finally. Her words were soft, careful, but not uncertain. The honesty landed in the room like something tangible, something heavier than silence. I exhaled, letting it out slowly. "I've been thinking about you too." My voice was barely above a whisper. Vulnerable, unpracticed, real. A small laugh escaped her. Not full, just enough to carry warmth. "It's complicated." "Yes," I said, and it was. Every risk, every pause, every boundary made the weight heavier. But still, sitting there, sharing a mug of tea, I felt the tension ease just a little. Not gone, just contained. I wanted to ask more, demand clarity, but the moment felt too fragile. Instead, I reached out, fingers brushing the edge of hers on the table. She didn't move away. A quiet acknowledgement. For a long moment, nothing else existed but that small touch. The mugs, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, she smiled. Tiny, unassuming, the kind that said, "I see you. I know." "Okay," I said softly. She nodded, her hand lifting just enough to press briefly against mine. Not holding, not claiming, but connecting. Enough. Weeks passed. I stopped timing my visits, stopped rehearsing what I might say. And yet, somehow, she was always there. Not all the time, not perfectly, but enough that the small rhythms of life began to feel fuller. Some mornings, I found her at the kitchen table at exactly 8:47 a.m., black coffee in a chipped mug, reading the newspaper. I'd lean against the counter, pretending to look out the window, letting the silence stretch between us comfortably. She'd glance up, a brief smile, then back to her page. No words needed. The quiet had become language. Afternoons were spent wandering streets with umbrellas or sitting on the old bench by the corner park. She'd tell me things I hadn't known. Childhood memories, small regrets, a favorite song she listened to when no one was around. I listened, sometimes offering nothing more than a nod or a shared glance, but I felt the weight of it. Every fragment of her trust, every hesitation she let me see, made the ordinary feel sacred. One rainy evening, we brewed tea together, the kettle hissing softly, steam curling into the kitchen's warm light. My hands brushed hers while reaching for the teapot. She didn't pull away. I didn't either. A small gesture, a tiny claim of presence, and somehow it carried the quiet gravity of every moment we'd shared. The near kisses, the pauses, the unanswered questions. Life wasn't perfect. Some days, she disappeared for hours. Some nights, I sat alone with a cup of black coffee, letting my thoughts wander to the times I'd almost spoken too much, almost leaned too close, almost ruined everything. But when she returned, even a simple smile, a casual glance, felt like home. We had our own rhythms now. She left her scarf on the chair when she ran out. I found her favorite mug in the sink, washed it, and left it on the counter. Small routines, unnoticed by anyone else, mattered to us. They were quiet proof that someone saw you, really saw you. And one evening, as the rain had just stopped and the street shimmered under lamplight, I caught her looking at me from across the kitchen, tea in hand, fingers brushing the rim of the mug. Her eyes crinkled just a little in recognition of everything we'd survived, everything we hadn't said, and maybe never would. I smiled, and she smiled back. Not a dramatic gesture, not a declaration, just acknowledgement. Enough. I took a sip of my tea, feeling its warmth slide down. The rain left puddles in the streets, a rhythm we'd both walked through before. And I realized that, somehow, everything had softened. The longing, the guilt, the pauses, the unsent messages. All of it had folded into a quiet, steady presence. And as she reached for the kettle again, humming softly under her breath, I understood. This, the unspoken gestures, the shared silences, the slow, careful steps toward one another, was what it meant to be together. Only we would notice the small things. The black coffee at 8:47 a.m., the umbrella left behind, the brief brush of hands that carried more meaning than words ever could. And that was enough. Engagement close. Optional for video. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next? You sat there a little longer, Quiet. Not resolved. Not perfect. Just human. Weeks passed. I stopped timing my visits, stopped rehearsing what I might say. And yet, somehow, she was always there. Not all the time, not perfectly, but enough that the small rhythms of life began to feel fuller. Some mornings, I found her at the kitchen table at exactly 8:47 a.m., black coffee in a chipped mug, reading the newspaper. I'd lean against the counter, pretending to look out the window, letting the silence stretch between us comfortably. She'd glance up, a brief smile, then back to her page. No words needed. The quiet had become language. Afternoons were spent wandering streets with umbrellas or sitting on the old bench by the corner park. She'd tell me things I hadn't known. Childhood memories, small regrets, a favorite song she listened to when no one was around. I listened, sometimes offering nothing more than a nod or a shared glance, but I felt the weight of it. Every fragment of her trust, every hesitation she let me see, made the ordinary feel sacred. One rainy evening, we brewed tea together, the kettle hissing softly, steam curling into the kitchen's warm light. My hands brushed hers while reaching for the teapot. She didn't pull away. I didn't either. A small gesture, a tiny claim of presence, and somehow it carried the quiet gravity of every moment we'd shared. The near kisses, the pauses, the unanswered questions. Life wasn't perfect. Some days, she disappeared for hours. Some nights, I sat alone with a cup of black coffee, letting my thoughts wander to the times I'd almost spoken too much, almost leaned too close, almost ruined everything. But when she returned, even a simple smile, a casual glance, felt like home. We had our own rhythms now. She left her scarf on the chair when she ran out. I found her favorite mug in the sink, washed it, and left it on the counter. Small routines, unnoticed by anyone else, mattered to us. They were quiet proof that someone saw you, really saw you. And one evening, as the rain had just stopped and the street shimmered under lamplight, I caught her looking at me from across the kitchen, tea in hand, fingers brushing the rim of the mug. Her eyes crinkled just a little in recognition of everything we'd survived, everything we hadn't said, and maybe never would. I smiled, and she smiled back. Not a dramatic gesture, not a declaration, just acknowledgement. Enough. I took a sip of my tea, feeling its warmth slide down. The rain left puddles in the streets, a rhythm we'd both walked through before. And I realized that, somehow, everything had softened. The longing, the guilt, the pauses, the unsent messages. All of it had folded into a quiet, steady presence. And as she reached for the kettle again, humming softly under her breath, I understood. This, the unspoken gestures, the shared silences, the slow, careful steps toward one another, was what it meant to be together. Only we would notice the small things. The black coffee at 8:47 a.m., the umbrella left behind, the brief brush of hands that carried more meaning than words ever could. And that was enough.